Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Westworld Season 3 Episode 2 breakdown, where I go through the episode in its entirety, and I give my thoughts, feelings, opinions, and predictions on what will happen next. So this episode moved very, very fast, and it focused on two main characters, Maeve and Bernard. We see Bernard going back to Westworld to try and find Maeve, and we see Maeve caught in another loop. And one thing I really loved about this episode is that we get to see Maeve relive loops over and over again and try and piece together the puzzle, much like we see Dolores, Bernard, and Maeve do in previous seasons. But this time she finds herself in Warworld. And we follow Maeve on many loops, discovering that this world isn't just in Westworld, it's actually a simulation. And this whole simulation was constructed for her to try and find answers, or to use her. The first character we see again is Hector, and we know that she loves Hector. And last time we saw him was in Season 2 when he was shot and killed, trying to let everyone else escape into the Valley Beyond. And we know based on last season, Hector never really became conscious, he just had free will. So this Hector that we're seeing in this episode could be actually the Hector that we know. Much like how Maeve was brought down to sublevel B83 and taken, they could have done the same thing with Hector, because they knew Hector was an important character for Maeve. Or this Hector could be a manifestation or quick creation by Insight or Serac to further understand Maeve and get her into the simulation. But then we also see Felix and Sylvester, and we start to realize that things aren't as they seem because Felix and Sylvester don't have a positive reaction when they see Maeve awaken. Felix chose the hosts over the humans last season, and Sylvester also warmed up to them. So I think here Maeve realizes that things aren't what they seem. It's as if they've forgotten everything happened. And my favorite character that I'm so glad to see again is Sizemore. And they did an amazing job with this character, making it believable. I genuinely thought that he was still alive. But much like we see with Felix and Sylvester, we see the same thing with Lee Sizemore, where he's a recreation, a reprint, but it's not an exact copy. When Sizemore brings Maeve to the Forge, he says that he saved her because he loved her, and Maeve points out that that's a miscalculation in his character. The reason why he sacrificed himself was because it was the right thing to do. And then again in Sizemore's office, he had pictures of Maeve all over his desk. But in reality, Maeve points out that he never cared about anyone more than himself. So I think it's important to look at the interpretation of these characters, because they're projected by Insight and created by Insight. And it goes to show that they don't know how to recreate a human. They really don't know who Lee Sizemore is, Felix or Sylvester. But Delos does. In the Forge, Delos learned how to properly encode a human. They just have to watch their behaviors and attribute it to the new base human code that they've created. Insight doesn't have this technology. That's why they don't know anything about these characters or what actions that they would do. And we see the same thing with Caleb in the last episode. His friend who died in the army has been taken and used as an artificial intelligence to help Caleb with therapy. And he wasn't an exact copy, and Caleb found that out.
No, that's not what you thought at all.
So if Rehoboam is the all-seeing eye that can project and calculate everything at once in a constant simulation, it's missing a big calculation if it truly doesn't understand humanity. And I think that's where the information of Delos comes in handy. But Maeve did realize that these people weren't real, and she realized later that she was in a simulation. And the one question that she tries to understand is, why is she there and what do they want from her? And I think from some of these scenes we can kind of discover what. Sizemore came in and said that he put her in World War II world because of her daughter. Because he wants Maeve to see her daughter again. And Maeve agrees. So Serac and the people who are following Maeve know that the daughter is her true cornerstone. It's her main drive as an individual. And then when they get there, Sizemore pokes and prods about where the Valley Beyond is. Where was the simulation projected to? And they discover that Maeve does not know the answer. And I think that gives us a key into the interest of Maeve. Serac uses Rehoboam as the all-seeing eye. And he says that they were projecting a better future and making a better future, but Dolores is the one anomaly that they can't calculate. But he says finally he can see a better future, because for the first time ever, the future has an author. And he obviously thinks if Dolores stays around, then the humans will no longer have a future. And I think with Serac, he believes that Maeve is the only key. And that's because, for one, Maeve's core drive is her daughter. And Serac learned when Maeve was in the simulation that she wanted nothing more than to go back to the Great Valley Beyond, a simulation. so he can threaten Maeve, torture Maeve, and keep Maeve from her daughter until he gets what he wants. Maeve kills Delores and removes one of the most dangerous hosts to mankind. They can take the coordinates off Dolores' dead brain module, and then he can send Maeve and all the other hosts to the Great Valley Beyond, where they're in a simulation and they will no longer bother humanity again. Because Maeve doesn't care. Whereas Delores believes that which is real is irreplaceable. The simulation is just another park. It's another false fantasy that was made by mankind. So we end Maeve's conversation with Serac as almost like a threat. He has complete control over Maeve. But I think he's going to build a relationship with her, and they will understand that they have a shared interest. Maeve wants the coordinates to her world, the Valley Beyond, and she wants to go see her daughter. And I think they want to be the pillars to make peace. Serac will represent the humans, Maeve represent the hosts, and then they'll go journey to their own respective worlds. And then Serac will be allowed to continue to use Rehoboam. We see it calculated and we see it represented in this image, but then we also see it introduce a lot of characters. It sees a disturbance with Dolores' location, and then it calls for increased scrutiny when Delores is there in London. Everywhere she goes, she is causing a rift or a difference than what Rehoboam calculated. But I think in time, Delores will be able to take advantage of that technology, maybe implement herself inside of it, and then use her code and understanding of humans to truly create a simulation of how humans would act. So she could project any future at any time indefinitely. And that's how I think Delores could take over the world. One other possibility with Maeve that I want to mention is it seems like she broke out of the simulation into reality, but what could have happened instead is Maeve was always in the simulation. So inside the simulation, she broke out of World War II world right into Serac's hands, and right now Maeve exists inside of Rehoboam. We see the image of it moving, unless they have this new technology that allows pictures to move like Harry Potter, or she's genuinely in a simulation still. But another person Rehoboam has seen is Bernard. In this episode, we get introduced to Bernard going back to Westworld. And we see that Rehoboam sees that there's a divergence, and it's pinpointed at Bernard's location. I think this technology knows when that boat, or when the person driving that boat, comes and goes, where they usually go on a Monday, for example. And they've diverted course because of Bernard. And I think Serac is going to discover that Delores is not the only threat, that it's also Bernard, because they're both unpredictable, and he can't control their actions. But I think Bernard is going to become even less predictable as time goes on. Right now he's looking for Maeve to try and stop Delores. But Bernard hasn't reached his center yet because he scrambled up his memories. He's not conscious. And the last time Bernard had a conscious mind, he actually saved Delores and set her free because he realized that she is necessary for host survival. So I think the same is going to happen here, where Bernard is going to unpredictably change his mind, and I think he'll be kind of the middle figure between Maeve and Delores. And the first sign we see of Bernard not truly reaching his center is when he doesn't even see the door inside of Sector 17 in Ford's old house. He only realizes it because it's open. On top of that, he has to give himself voice prompts and put himself into diagnostics to see if Delores is tempered with his code. If he was truly conscious, that would be impossible. And finally, we get to see Ashley again, which was great. We see that he fulfilled his purpose in saving Bernard and taking care of the host on the park, so he killed himself. He fulfilled his core drive. And what I find interesting is when he finds out that Ashley is a host, he says that he's shocked that he's one of them. But then he takes responsibility and says that, oh, you're one of us.
You're one of them. Of us, I mean.
And that just shows how disconnected Bernard is from who he is as a host. He did fidelity testing and was created to think that he is human. So now he's trying to adjust to actually being a host. So he's caught in the middle, and I think as he becomes more and more conscious and finds his center, he'll come more to terms with who he is. But now Ashley still needs to protect Bernard, so they end up going to sublevel B83 to try and find Maeve. Now we hear some interesting news, that the park is actually shut down. And since Delores has a really firm control on what's going on right now in Delos, Delores is corporate. So she can protect the forge, she can protect the cradle, and she can protect all of the hosts who are not conscious living in the park. And just like as Ford says, Delores could leave them in the park to continuously suffer until they get closer to reaching their maze. But what Bernard and Ashley discover here is that Maeve's module has been stolen. So it could just be Maeve's module that was taken and implemented inside of Rehoboam. And then we end up seeing Dan and Dave from Game of Thrones, and I have to address this. I wish that they made a Game of Thrones Westworld, so all the hosts could become conscious and go off script, so it would be so much better than the last season that we got. Because if every single person in Game of Thrones had common sense, we wouldn't have ended up with the ending that we got. But anyways, we see that Bernard ends up getting some answers. He scans himself and he ends up looking back in the past, much like he did in season 2. He's reliving memories and trying to piece it together. He sees Arnold and Dolores, and that's really just Bernard and Dolores in the cradle, testing for fidelity. And we see Liam Dempsey and that Dolores really wanted him. And we've seen that she's been pursuing him last episode. And he also remembers Charlotte making him, and that's going to be a lot of questions moving forward. Who is who? What brain modules did Dolores take? Who does she have? And as I said before, the only people I'm willing to confirm on is Abernathy, Lawrence, Clementine, and Bernard. But finally, Bernard and Ashley leave, and I really like their dynamic now, and it will be really fun to see them together in future episodes. And it's good that Ashley doesn't have to retire himself, that Bernard actually changed his core drive to protect Bernard at all costs. But hopefully, eventually, Ashley becomes self-conscious and self-aware so he can change his own core drive. But of course, for that to happen, he would need to experience suffering, which could only really come from Bernard, since Bernard is now his core drive. So it'll be fun to see their dynamic evolve, and it'll be funny to see them both become conscious, maybe at the same time. But that is all I have to say about this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But until next time, see you guys later.